to think about here today. All joking aside though, my name is Ben Wright. I am CEO and founder of a company here in Denver called Velocity Global. If you haven't heard of Velocity Global, we're a 5-year-old company, I guess not really a startup anymore. What we do is we help companies expand and employ people around the world. The easiest way I can explain it, and only sharing this to provide context for why I'm about to talk about what I'm going to talk about, is that if you are a company and you're looking to hire someone in a foreign country, wherever that happens to be, and you don't have the infrastructure set up, meaning a company set up in that country by which to employ someone, we're like the WeWork or the Airbnb of international employment. We have the ability to employ people in 186 countries on your behalf so that you don't have to go set up a company. Make sense? And we also do recruiting and immigration and benefits and consulting that we kind of wrap around that. Just a little tiny bit more about the company. Again, 5 years old, 125 people. 85 of those are here in Denver, Colorado. We office up in Rhino. What else do you need to know about us? We were blessed this last year. We were named the 4th fastest growing private company in the US by Inc. magazine. So all testament to our team. And for companies who are going global like they never have before. So the topic that I'm here to talk about today is the future of global employment, but really it's the future of work, right? So I want to talk about the future of work and what that means. We just recently, as an organization, did a research paper. We interviewed over 1,000 executives of tech companies about global matters, right? Because that's what we do. And there were some really fascinating things that came out about that. So of these 1,000 plus executives that we interviewed, 21% of them said that today, this very day, in 2019, they're operating in 3 or more countries around the world. And these were companies of all sizes, right? Large, small, everything in between. So these tech companies are going global at the rate of 1 out of every 5. In 3 or more, they have a presence in 3 or more countries. What I thought was fascinating is we then asked them, what is that going to look like for you in 5 years' time? And it went from 1 in 5 to almost 4 in 5. So almost 80% of tech companies anticipate being in 3 or more countries in just the next 5 years, right? So these companies are going global. So the next thing we asked them is, why? Why are you going global? And the number one answer is, frankly, the number one answer which has always been given is we want access to broader companies. We want to sell our services all across the globe. We want a wider access to our customers, right? So again, no surprise there that that's the reason companies have kind of always given. What really surprised us, and selfishly, was like, yeah, okay, that's actually really good for what we do. The second thing, and it's been absolutely climbing up the charts, and we're talking about the second reason, we're talking about like a modest, almost rounding error difference of the second reason why companies are going global and plan to go global is access to talent, right? Hence why I'm talking today about the future of work. So access to talent is the number 2 reason, and it's just barely there. And I guarantee you that's going to surpass access to gaining more companies, more clients all across the globe momentarily. We know that, and we live that a little bit here in the US, particularly in Colorado. Unemployment rate today in Colorado is 3.5%, right? If you're a business owner, if you're a hiring manager, you know this, the war on talent is real, and that's happening globally. Finally, the very next thing, finally in terms of these points, the very next thing we asked them is, what are the biggest challenges you face as you've gone global or as you plan to go global? The top 4 answers were all around employment. All around employment. So interestingly, the number 1 reason, by just a little margin, was to access clients. That was only the number 7 or number 8 reason, right, of the challenges of how am I going to find those clients. The top 4 reasons were all related to employment. So what we're talking about here, people, is the future of work is here and the future of work is global. Okay? So The way that companies have always gone about it, about this future of work thing, and I'll give you a story that I hear and we hear all the time. The head of sales walks into the head of HR's office, drops down a piece of paper and says, great news, you know how we said we have to take these sales global, and you know how we have to increase sales. I've got a new salesperson, and she's in Cape Town, and she starts on Monday. I need you to go ahead and sign this. And of course, the head of HR freaks out and says, I have no idea what to do, so you call your lawyer, you call your accountant, and you say, what do I need to do about doing business in South Africa? How do I employ this person? They then give you the advice, you need to go set up a company in South Africa by which to employ them. For the record and for what it matters, and I'm sure everybody's doing it for pure reasons, the lawyers and the accountants get paid because you set up a company and all the compliance that goes along with that. But the point of it being is this is the way companies have always gone about doing it. And so if soon to be the #1 reason why companies need to expand globally is to access the best talent pool that they can, there have to be different ways for them to go about that. So that's what I want to focus on my comments on here today. I want you to think about, again, if you're a business owner, if you're a hiring manager, if you're in the service industry and you've got clients that are going global, the very first thing you need to consider when accessing talent across the globe is what is that person or those people going to be doing? Is it a project work? Is it kind of limited in scope? Is it the middle of the road? Is it potentially a less critical hire, but somebody who really kind of needs to work for you full time? Or is this somebody who actually needs to work for you full time? They're a really important part of the business. Maybe it's a country manager, maybe it's their first salesperson, maybe it's a highly respected software developer that just happens to live in Greece, right? Those are the three things you really need to consider. So if you're looking at project work, you have access to systems and platforms today that 5 years ago you didn't have access to. I don't know if anybody, quick show of hands here, does anybody use Upwork, Outsourcely, Fiverr, or something like that? A few. Okay, those platforms are absolutely amazing. We use them. We've got 125 people, but we've got probably 20, 25 people who we engage on a contractor basis on Upwork, and they're literally, we don't care where they are. We like the right talent, we like what they do, we like what they charge, but it's a distinct project. We don't intend to set up a company around them, we don't intend to establish a presence in that country, we just have a defined project that we just need an extra set of hands on. It's perfect. And typically, the costs for that service are about 10%. So whatever you would pay that person, tack on 10% and you go, right? Perfect solution to that. If that's something that you need, I encourage you to take a look at it. Again, those are just three. There's tons of platforms out there where you can utilize today to get extra hands, particularly in a time like right now when just finding talent is difficult. Okay, let's think about the second scenario, which is it may not just be a distinct project. Maybe this actually is somebody who you want to work for you on a long-term basis, but you're not certain about the market, you're not certain if you want to go in. You can potentially look at a contractor model, right, for being able to employ those folks overseas. It's not necessarily a model I espouse because I think I actually don't think, I watch a lot of companies really kind of misuse this contractor idea. It really is a full-time person who's working for you. And you got to be careful with them because if, again, let's use that example of a software developer who just happens to be in Greece who's working on your code. If it's a contractor, you're going to have a very difficult time protecting that intellectual property. If it's a contractor and they are, by definition, sort of free to work for other people. They may work part-time for you, part-time for somebody else. Easy for them to get distracted or maybe pick up a job and then no longer, they'd be halfway through the project and then they're not there anymore. Three, there's a lot of countries around the world that don't actually allow contractors as a model for quote-unquote employment. Brazil being a great example, there literally is no legal vehicle to call someone a contractor. You have to engage with either an employee or a company. But if used right, that's definitely an interesting way to do it. And again, you can use kind of that Upwork model, but that tends to be more for a part-time. So finding that talent can be a little difficult, but that's a good kind of intermediary step. Now let's take the third, which is, let's say tech company, doesn't matter what kind of organization you are, you've realized that there is a market for you in Europe. And you've been selling to that market from the US, and the close ratios aren't quite as high as they should be. Maybe speaking the same language, but not really speaking the same language. Time zone isn't really working. You decide it's time to actually put somebody in that country. And trust me, this is not a pitch for Velocity Global Services. This is just common sense. There is a model called a global employer of record, a global PEO, which is where instead of going and setting up a company for that very first person, you can actually employ them under someone else's tax ID, right? It allows you to get into that country with literally in the matter of days, as opposed to the months that it takes to set up a company. It's typically a fraction of the cost. We estimate that it's half the cost, if not more. And it gives you incredible flexibility that you wouldn't have if you go establish your own presence. Because if that individual doesn't work out or the market doesn't work out like the way you think it will, once that employment relationship is done, then you're out of that country and you're all set, right? My advice to companies are, since the dawn of time, always been told you have to go set up a presence. And in this day and age, particularly around employment, we've got to stay agile, right? With historically low unemployment rates, and we're starting to see it, I was just reading an article the other day, employees are starting to leave their current companies because they're getting recruited away, and on average, they make 20% higher salary so that they can be, coerced or incented or motivated to be able to join. That's happening and that's real because unemployment is so low. So until you have a critical mass in that country, and I think if we think that number is about 20 employees in a country, not until then do you actually think about going and establishing the infrastructure, investing the time, investing the cost, knowing that you're going to be in that country for the long haul, right? The reason I'm sharing all this is again, critically important. If you're having trouble accessing the talent in your own city, in your own state, in your own country, there's people all across the globe who may be perfectly fit, even if they speak a different language, even if they have a different background or a different experience, who may be able to come work for you. And so you need to start thinking about some creative ways to be able to employ them to keep up with the pace of business, which is frankly at a very different pace than what we've always kind of historically been told. The way your dad did it, the way your mom did it when they, went global with their companies and their businesses. These comments are kind of intended to be a little bit short here today because I want to make sure that I save time at the end for any questions that people have. But the whole point of this is that there are ways available to companies today to be able to expand and be able to employ people, to be able to keep you agile. And I always think, there was a famous quote by Reid Hoffman who once said, "There are 1 billion smart people on this world and none of them work for you." Right? So it's time. It's time to start harnessing the power of the crowd. It's time to start harnessing the power of talent anywhere. And it's time to start keeping your organization agile. And you're gonna, if you haven't heard it yet from Karen Gerwitz, you probably will, because I feel like every year she shares these statistics here at the World Trade Center conference. And I don't remember the exact numbers, so I'm not actually going to bastardize it by doing that, but what I'll tell you and what I take from it every single year is companies that export a good or a service or have a presence and do business globally accomplish 3 things, and this really differentiates themselves from their peers and their competitors. 1, they grow faster. 2, they're more profitable. And 3, they actually create more jobs at home than their competitors and their colleagues who only keep their vision cast down into the local market. So I want to wrap up there on kind of the comments and some of the ideas and suggestions in terms of you're thinking about globally. I wanted to make sure I had enough time at the end. So I'd love to hear from all of you for companies who are thinking about going global, thinking about questions, who are struggling to find talent here in that market, which I think we're all probably facing. So let's go ahead and open it up. And if there are no questions, I did a very effective job. And you get 5 minutes back in your day.
How are you approaching the data privacy laws operating in multiple countries?
Data privacy, which one? GDPR, right? I mean, there's a whole laundry list. That is one of the huge challenges right now is, GDPR has been the one that is most front and center for a lot of organizations. It's the one that's really kind of been leading the charge, but it's unbelievable. Regions, countries, cities have been enacting their own privacy laws, and how they all come together is a real difficult thing. And I will tell you from firsthand experience for an organization like ours that handles very sensitive data for employees literally across the globe. How do you keep that data? We don't concern ourselves with how to keep that data safe. We do concern ourselves with that, but it's how do you make sure you're kind of following all those rules and regulations. So in terms of GDPR and a lot of these data privacy, first and foremost, it's obviously important to go get good advice. We work with, we experts, we actually have a data privacy officer at Velocity Global. And then we work with firms who help ensure that we got to a place where we're compliant around it and then we continue that compliance. We actually just had a quarterly update yesterday morning with our team. And one of the data points that we gave to our team is, kind of a pat on the back. Thank you to everyone for always thinking about privacy, always thinking about security, because it takes every single one of us to do it. You've got to be able to build the systems so that that data is housed in a certain place, that there's no leakage of that data. You have to secure that data to make sure it doesn't get anywhere, right? That first part is really honestly about people. You got to do the right thing if you're going to be sharing, or you're going to be communicating about sensitive PII type data. It has to be in a particular system. You have to secure that system, but then you have to actually have it available too. We're currently supporting over 1,000 employees across the globe, right today, this very day, in 110 countries. And in just the last month, we've had 2 requests for give me access to every single instance of where you have my data. And one of those was actually, I then want you to delete my data, right, as somebody who has left the organization. So from a technology perspective and a process perspective, you gotta be buttoned up because you gotta be able to deliver that information. Here's every single instance where we had your name, where we had your social security number or the equivalent in that country, your pay and those sort of things. It's no laughing matter. Is there another question over here?
In your experience with your clients that are dealing with China and manufacturing in China, what have you seen with them either setting up their own office for inspection and managing the production versus using your services to have people over there without them setting up their own office?
The rule of thumb that we tend to see from experience in China is more like 10. If you have 10 people in a country, it probably makes sense to go through the process of setting up your own operations. Now, there's 2 ways to look at it. If you are actually doing the manufacturing yourself, which some companies do, it's a whole different ballgame, right? You got to go set up your own wholly owned foreign enterprise, or WFOE as they call it, in China. That's going to take you about 6 to 8 months. It's going to cost you $40,000 to $50,000 to set it up, and it's going to cost you about $75,000 a year to maintain it, right? So if you're doing your own manufacturing, you simply have to do that, right? If you have representatives, whether they be foreign nationals or local, Chinese nationals who are there overseeing the outsourced manufacturers, the rule of thumb tends to be 10 So if you kind of hit 10 or more, it's probably about that time where you actually set up your own company. You make sure someone is designated as the country manager. In China in particular, there's some really nuanced and interesting rules. If you have a company, there's this thing called a CHOPS, which is basically a stamp. Every single document has to be signed with those CHOPS or that stamp. And that stamp gives you incredible power, but it has to be in that country, right? And you have to have those chops if you have a company established, and so you better darn well make sure that the individual who has access to all of that is a person that you trust, right? So that's really big and that's really important. And that goes, when we're necessarily talking about chops, that's another one of the reasons why there is a time and a place to go set up a company in a country. But if you set up a company, you got to have a bank account and you have to have a legal representation. And oftentimes you have to have, you may have a US director, but you have to have a local director, right? The person in that country is going to have access to that bank account, and they have signing authority. They're going to have signing authority, right? You darn well better make sure that the person you have in that country is upstanding. If they've got access to that cash account, that they're doing all the right things, that you're monitoring it. And so lots of things you need to consider if you're actually going the whole 100 yards and setting up a full entity in that country. Any other questions? We're done. Or am I supposed to dance? We're done. Well, thank you, everybody. Ben Wright, thanks for joining us.